So the Greens have won the Gorton and Denton by-election, with Reform coming a very respectable second and Labour pushed into third, and the Tories will likely lose their deposit. The actual turnout was higher than at the last election, which means that at least one side managed to activate a undecided or inactive voters within the seat. Looking at the results in terms of Labour and Greens, I would suggest it was probably the Greens. There is at least some concern over what's called family voting, i.e. people being forced to vote together to ensure that the vote's cast in the right way. That is, however, unconfirmed. It is just an initial observation from one group. Can we tell very much from this by-election result? Probably not. It's one of the safest Labour seats, so I suppose you could take that from it. But by-elections tend to be more a referendum on how well the governing party is doing rather than anything else. I suppose the only thing that I would take from it is the fact that the Greens are now edging over to become more and more an out-and-out Islamic dominated party, but that is based upon a single constituency, which is very heavily Muslim anyway. I think where it gets interesting is if we project into the forthcoming election. A couple of things here are important. Just as with the Conservatives, under the first past the post system, the advantage has always gone to the big two because we have no proportional system. So it's whoever gets the most votes in a given constituency wins that seat. Therefore, you may as well vote for us because there's no point voting for a smaller party because it is a wasted vote. Well, that has now been proven to be incorrect, as it has been proven to be incorrect for Reform swinging constituencies as well. So that takes away, both on the left and the right, from Labour and from the Conservatives, one of their main historical advantages as being the incumbent duopoly within that system. The other thing that I think is interesting to note is that regardless of what some people are saying online, this is not a by-election that was particularly heavy on policy. It was very heavy on trope, and it was very heavy on vibes. We can argue that's a good or a bad thing, but it's not the fact that people didn't have a clear policy offering is the reason why different parties did well or worse. What that means moving into the election is, though, that certainly on the left, and you'll certainly see it on the right as well, but I think that the right is probably slightly different in terms of the seats that Reform and the Conservatives are likely to be contesting and likely to win. But certainly on the left, what you're now going to see is Labour is going to be unable to say there's no point voting for the Greens, you will just let someone else in. And in actual fact, that can actually begin to be inverted with the Greens saying there's no point voting for Labour, you're just wasting your vote. Furthermore, though, as we progress towards some sort of general election in the next couple of years, in my opinion, the other thing that's going to come out is obviously that the Green Party policy platform is completely and utterly barking mad. I don't say that with any hurt or venom in my heart, but it's just a reality of the situation. And that policy platform is going to get pulled to pieces slowly but surely by the press, because they will have no choice but to actually engage with it. That's a problem, because that policy platform that the Greens have is likely, and this result is likely to start pulling Labour in the same direction. So the actual outcome is it's going to shift the left ever more into a position which, to be honest, is unpalatable for a majority of the people in the country. That does not mean that the economic vibes that they have campaigned on and will continue to campaign on about low pay, people struggling, and everything else won't cut through. But when you get into the granular detail, it will likely fall to pieces. And I think that's really the big takeaway for me. Is, to be honest, this sets up as one hell of a contest on the left for who's going to be the default party at the next election. I think it also makes it far more complicated. Anyone who believes there's going to be some sort of electoral pact or anything else between the Greens and Labour. This is the Green Party, which I profoundly disagree with, but have every right to campaign for. This is their historical moment to break through. That means any deals with Labour will likely to be actually remove that chance, and therefore they're going to have to campaign and attempt to win in nearly every constituency. Again, it's worth noting that this constituency was something like the 6th safest Labour seat. Now, as I said, it's very difficult / impossible, near impossible to actually project forward a by-election into a general election, but people will still do that. And what the likely outcome is, as I said, is that the Greens are going to go, well, if we can win here, we can win anywhere. Where that gets interesting is obviously in red wall constituencies, much more across the small towns, provinces, stuff like that, where the main competitor will be Reform. I think the other thing that will come out over the next 2 to 3 years that will probably, again, it's going to hurt the Greens, but it will have a knock-on effect on Labour, is actually the radically incompatible nature of the left-wing coalition that was in Labour and is now migrating over to the Greens. That is an Islamic, conservative, socially conservative, and largely hostile segment of the population, made up of the Pakistani population, etc., who have no real interest in the environmental side of things, and definitely have absolutely are out and out hostile to the progressive social tropes of the left, such as trans rights, gay rights, and much, much more, and how those will actually start to intersect and play out. The Greens are going to find that it is a coalition that they cannot really keep together, because sooner or later they have to come up with a policy platform that everyone can start clustering around. And I suspect that as more and more it becomes an Islamic or Muslim-dominated party, that will effectively push out the progressive wings, who will suddenly realise that effectively they're getting pushed out and replaced. The best the best analogy, or the best similarity I can point to, is a town in Michigan in the United States of America, which allowed a large population of Muslims from, I think, Somalia, but I could be wrong on that, to settle in the town. They had charities to support these people, etc., etc. And once that population became big enough, and they managed to get their own mayor, they banned gay pride and much, much more. Effectively, they used the progressive left, as the useful idiots that they are, to gain power, and then they dump them. And I suspect you'll see the same thing play out within the Greens. And I think that's something that, as I said, will wash back into Labour, because fundamentally it's not really actually about any particular party. It is the entire left-wing coalition is collapsing. It is now completely and utterly incompatible in every way. And that will become more and more obvious with time. If I was Nigel Farage, what would I be going? I would be disappointed they didn't do better, though they still beat Labour. They ran a pretty lacklustre campaign in many ways, from what I can see. However, they did beat Labour. They came second, Labour in third. The advantage to that is probably the bit I've already mentioned, which is about the fact that the Greens now are going to push in every single constituency. The other issue that it causes for Labour is the fact that you now have a party on the left and the right which is eating into your base from both sides. So how do you pivot to survive that? I don't think they can. I don't think there is a way they can get around that. I suspect that a little bit like the Tories, their best strategy is actually a cockroach strategy, which is just survival and a hope that the other parties explode in due course. So Farage will be probably happy about that, Farage and Reform. The other thing that I think that they will probably be happy about or be positive about is obviously the performance of the Conservatives, which they all but wiped out in the constituency. I think that Reform now can take that forward. Again, you can't really project forward but into a general election, but I think you could probably project forward into the local elections and be positive that if they can swing enough Conservative voters, they're likely to do very, 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 very well. The unknown part is obviously how many of those voters, Conservative voters, switch to Reform. Obviously, probably a huge portion based upon the results, but actually also how many tactically voted for, say, Labour in order to just try and keep Reform out. That's not known. And I mean, the question is whether they'd even want those people, but that's a by the by. The other thing that I think that he will be happy with is if he can go into the forthcoming general election as effectively Reform versus the bonkers left. That's a very powerful position to take, because I think that if you take even, say, my mother, who is a left-wing person, social democrat, a little bit like myself, historically, she will never vote Green. She knows enough about the party, she would never vote for the Greens. So the likely outcome, okay, in her constituency, Torquay, would be that she would vote Lib Dem. However, in others, it would likely deactivate voters, or even in some cases push them to vote Reform as the lesser of two evils, particularly if the Reform party can offer up a platform of national renewal. So we'll see. That's it.